Hello and welcome to another episode, or what are we going to call it, to the Happy Head podcast. My name is Paul, your host, and today I'm with Sue Curr, who 8 years ago described herself like the first line from a mega song, depressed, drunk as a skunk, and down. Hi Sue, how are you doing?
Hello. Hello there. I'm really well, thank you, Paul. Really well. Thanks for having me on.
No, my pleasure. Listen, I've got to ask you, when before we do these things, we kind of have a bit of a bio exchange, and we find out what the person's kind of story is in outline. And Sue sent me this line saying, 8 years ago I was down, depressed, and drunk as a skunk, and almost dead. What on earth led you to being in that state, Sue?
Um, in all honesty, it was a lifelong battle with mental health initially. Initially lasted 50 of my 52 years up to that point, so it was a pretty big initially. But I childhood issues triggered a lifelong need to be a people pleaser, to say yes when no would have been far more sensible. The habits as children that we learn that stick. And as I grew into adolescence and ultimately adulthood, in inverted commas, because I don't actually think I've still grown up yet, to be fair. As I grew into adulthood, I hung on to the stories I was telling myself about my past, which made my mental health journey worse. By the late September of 2012, my mental health had declined to the degree that I'd sort of descended into almost total oblivion in terms of full-blown alcoholism. 26th of September 2012, I went to see my GP round about this time in the morning, sat down in front of her, already halfway down my second bottle of wine for the day at that point. And she took one look at me. I'd gone for some routine blood results, and she took one look at my results, looked at me, picked the phone up and said, and I said to her, "What are you doing?" She said, I'm phoning for an ambulance like an idiot. I looked over my shoulder and asked her who for. There was me and her in the room. Such was the extent of my denial even then. Um, and she said, you're in big trouble. Your liver's gone. It's failed. And long story short, she admitted me. I woke up 5 days later in intensive care in a hospital in Sheffield where I lived at that time. And I was told I was lucky to survive the battle, but I'd not won the war. I was still dying. So my family were told to prepare for the worst. Now, clearly, 8 years later, I declined the offer to meet the Grim Reaper because I wasn't that keen on it by that point, because they'd medically detoxed me. So when I woke up, I was fortunate in that I'd gone through all the detox, all the shakes and the delirium tremors and all that business, and I have no vivid or any other type of recollection of it, for which I'm extremely grateful, to be fair. But yeah, so I was a mess. I was literally twice the person I am now. I was 7.5 stone heavier than I am now. And on the day
Wow.
I was admitted to hospital, I was taking 44 different pills and potions for all manner of ailments that come with being morbidly obese, drunk, depressed, and all the rest of it. And today I'm medication free. I'm clean and sober in excess of 8 years. I turned 3,000 sober days on what would have been my father's 86th birthday this year, actually, which was nice. I dedicated that one to him because he'd been sober for 7 years before he passed away. So it all sort of came together nice and neatly this year. COVID, all things COVID notwithstanding. So that's how I ended up down, depressed, and drunk as a skunk. But in my recovery, I suddenly realised that actually it wasn't my past that had triggered anything in my behaviors in terms of my mental health or anything like that. It was actually the story that I was telling myself about it. This had happened, and therefore this is not my fault. That's their fault, so therefore I can have another drink and they can go screw themselves. Duh. And the irony of it is the person who I blamed mostly for all the woes that I'd ever experienced up to the age of 52, they'd been dead for 13 years the day I was admitted to hospital, and it had no significant impact on my life for 16 years prior to that. So for 30 years, I had a pretty spectacular drinking career, which ultimately did nearly kill me. But none of it, in inverted commas, was my fault, which I very quickly in this part of my life came to realize was a load of rhubarb, because we ultimately are, all of us, responsible for the choices that we make daily. And those choices always have a consequence, good, bad, or indifferent. We have a consequence. If we get out of bed in the morning, there is a consequence to that. If we stay in bed in the morning, there's a consequence to that. It's the sliding doors film with Gwyneth Paltrow. Life is a game of sliding doors. And I just repeatedly, for 52 years up to that point, kept opening the wrong blessed door. These days, as Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. So that's my mantra. I try every day to do better than I did yesterday.
Sliding doors is a great analogy. I've been watching Fringe, which is a show on Netflix, a sci-fi thing.
Okay.
And in one episode, I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, but he talks about how life is choices. You know, like you just said, you get up out of bed or you decide not to get out of bed. That, you know, so you stay in bed. There's a choice of what happens when you're in bed. Or alternatively, you get out of bed, and then from that, it's just all the way along. And you said that you spent what 20 odd years blaming someone who had actually no direct impact in your life.
Yeah.
That was your kind of your target, it's the point of your blame. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and to be fair, and to be completely transparent, I long ago made peace both with my past, and ultimately forgiving the person that I'd blamed for so very long for everything. Because what I came to know, um, more than anything else, was that we all of us on this journey through life only know what we know. And there was so much about the person who I blamed for everything that I didn't know about them, even though they were a very close family member. I didn't know so much of the puzzle of their life that would have made sense to how it impacted on my life. I wouldn't have understood it if I'd have known it as a child, to be fair. But if I'd have known, say, around about the age of 21, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, because I'd still be off working for somebody else and doing my thing as people do. But what I know for sure is everything happens for a reason.
Mm.
Everything, and our part in that comes on the back of the choices that we make absolutely every second of every day, without exception. We can't escape it. So people say to me all the time, the thing is, Sue, I can't make a choice. And I said, well, by definition, what do you do then? She said, well, I don't make a choice. I said, well, that's a choice.
We're always making choices.
Yeah. If you are choosing not to make a choice, that is a choice, and therefore you've just destroyed your own argument. So what's your real excuse?
There's a couple of things you said there that are really, really important. The first one was about we only know what we know, but conversely, and it sounds a bit weird, but we don't know what we don't know. And I think that is a really big disadvantage and a misunderstanding for a lot of us, because especially with social media and all the rest of it today, we assume so much that you're an alcoholic because of X, Y, or Z, or you're out of a job because of X, Y, Z, or you're walking down the street looking like a miserable bugger because of X, Y, Z. We don't know that person's backstory. There was a video floating around Facebook a couple of years ago, and there was a guy. It was a tube train, and your usual things going on. There's a guy sitting there trying to read his paper, and there's a child been a real pain in the neck, you know, running around screaming, shouting, all the rest of it. And dad looks really miserable and apologetic. And the coach kind of gradually empties, and people sort of like tutting and pointing at the kid and stuff like this. And apparently at the end, there's just like the guy trying to read his newspaper and the dad and the kid. And the guy says to the dad, looks like you're having a real problem there with your son today. He said, yeah, I know, I'm really sorry, but we've just come back from the hospital and to say goodbye to his mum who died today.
Yeah.
So all of those
I remember that. I saw that one. I remember it. Yeah.
All of those people assumed that the dad had no control over the child, and yet the poor kid was just doing whatever he was doing after he'd just seen his mum pass away.
Yeah.
And I think we see that every single day, people making assumptions and not knowing what they don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the situation, because there is always a bigger picture. And the way I use the analogy I use these days, we've all got smartphones, and if you're anything like me, my smartphone's always in my hand. I'm always taking pictures of my grandkids or where I'm at the minute, any nice view or whatever. And I usually crop out the bits that I don't like. You know, if I've managed to get I don't know, a road sign in, for instance, and it's a picture of a grandchild, I'll edit it down and I'll chop out the road sign, so I've got a nice, pretty little picture. It's not the true reflection of that moment in time because I've edited it. Every picture that I've ever edited, I can mostly remember what was on the outer edges of that picture that I can no longer see. Life's like that. We tunnel down. We're both sharing this exact same moment in time. We can both see through the magnificence that is technology, our individual backgrounds. We're both sharing the same moment, the same thoughts, etc. We're having an exchange of views. In my peripheral vision, I can see the screen and your fairy lights behind you, but in my peripheral vision, I can see my office in the background. I can see that out through the window and the cars going by, even though we are apparently in lockdown at the minute. And I can see all manner of other things, but I'm not consciously registering it. I was then for the purposes of this. But we register so much more than we anticipate or understand daily. Something in the region of 85,000 pieces of information go in through our five senses daily. And it's our magnificent brain's job to filter out what it thinks we need to number one, know, and number two, remember.
It's like the new car syndrome, isn't it? You buy a yellow car.
Yes.
You buy a yellow car, a brand new car, and you've never seen a yellow car before, apart from this one in the forecourt. You drive it off the forecourt, and everywhere you look, there are yellow cars. Because up until that moment, yellow cars weren't important to you. But now you've bought one and you drive it, your brain goes, we're in a yellow car, so I think she needs to know about all these other yellow cars. And suddenly they start appearing everywhere.
Absolutely. It's a reticular activation system that we all have. You know, I made I do most years create a vision board at the beginning of each year. I'm in debate as to whether or not to bother for 2021, to be fair. But a couple of years ago I made a vision board, and purple's my favorite color. It's part of my branding and everything. But I decided I wanted a purple Jaguar that year. I've still to get one. But I put a picture of a Jaguar on my car on my vision board, and then I just forgot about it. And I live quite close by to a motorway intersection, and I travel backwards and forwards up and down it daily almost in normal times. And I didn't consciously ever remember seeing any Jaguar car, let alone a purple one. That the first day I went out, I was driving to Surrey to see one of my kids, and that first day on the motorway, 200 miles between my house and their house, I saw 3 purple Jags and 43 different Jags in total. My brain went on overload. I was like, no, stop it. All right, I get the message. I don't want to see any more Jags. Thanks very much. But that's the power of the brain. Our brain is you can forget Apple or Google, Paul. It's the most powerful operating system that there will ever be. It forgets nothing. We forget, but we're designed to forget, because we drive ourselves insane if we could remember every single thing that went in our head every single day.
Recall, isn't it? We could.
Yes.
It's all stored in there, but we only recall the salient points. Like when we were kids, you'd always remember your phone number because you had one phone that was fixed to the wall in your house.
Absolutely.
And, you know, people didn't walk around with diaries and filofaxes and stuff like that. So you had to know your phone number so you could phone home if you got stuck. Whereas now, everybody's got one of these things, and so people tend not to know their own phone number.
No, we don't. The way I describe it when I'm working with people is that if we take the brain and its 3 major components, you know, the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious brain, our conscious mind, our conscious brain is the bit that knows that we're in this virtual room together, we're having this conversation, and we're focused on each other. Our subconscious brain is the bit that we don't ever need to remember how to drive our cars, for example, until we get in the car. And then even then, we don't really have to remember how to drive it, because we've done it so many times that we literally, the number of times I've driven from Sheffield to Leeds, got out of the car and gone, how the heck did I just get here? No conscious memory of it, because I've done the journey so many times. So the brain is the operating system. The conscious brain is the operating system. The subconscious brain are the bits that I like to be in our files and folders. We open them when we need them. We access them, and when we don't need to remember how to turn the ignition on anymore, we park it, so to speak, if you pardon the analogy. Our unconscious mind is the equivalent of a recycle bin on a computer. Everything that we've ever forgotten, in inverted commas, is in there. And the unconscious brain is completely and totally unresponsive to anything that happens on a daily basis. But it's equally, completely, and totally responsible for driving the subconscious brain to prompt the conscious brain to do the things, react in a certain way. So, for instance, if somebody is incredibly racist, they're not going to be, thinking about their hatred of people of other colours 24/7 until possibly they walk past someone in the street. And it's the unconscious subliminal beliefs that are going, there you go, there's somebody of a different colour, you hate that person. Why they get to that stage in their life is a whole different sort of ball game altogether, a different conversation. But the brain, the three separate yet interdependent parts of our brain are largely keeping us alive, helping us to stay safe, but totally and utterly driving every belief, and for that read story, that we tell ourselves, almost from the second we become conscious. Now, as children, we're born conscious. We're born conscious, but we don't yet have a consciousness. That comes a little bit later. But the instant we start to form a consciousness and then develop the power of recall, memory, then things start to change. And as children, which is certainly what happened to me in terms of my story, I learned very, very quickly. I knew how to play, but I learned how to sit still. I knew how to be loud, but I learned how to be quiet. It was a different era, 60s, and parenting skills were very, much
Different.
less developed than they are now. They're different, yeah, for sure. My grandmother used to say, spare the rod, spoil the child, things like that. And thankfully, we've evolved
Seen and not
quite
heard and
significantly.
all that kind of thing.
Absolutely. But it's the way, I said to somebody the other day, whether we are parents ourselves or not, the influence that we have on the children in our lives is the most responsible job that any of us will ever have. We are creating the next generation. Parenting, you can forget the leaders of the Western world. So please forget them at the minute. We can forget the leaders of the Western world. We are creating, in every child that we come into contact with, we are creating the future leaders of the world, the future teachers, the future doctors. And it's our responsibility. It's a moral imperative, I think, to make sure that we help them to be as rounded as they possibly can be.
The problem is they don't come with a manual.
Oh, God, no.
I mean, you mentioned driving earlier on. You need a driving license to drive a car by yourself. If you want to fly an aeroplane, you've got to go through all sorts of loops to get a pilot's license. Yet anybody with the physical ability can have a child. And
absolutely.
You don't even get an inspector coming round to make sure that you're doing it right. And so is there any wonder?
Incredible.
Is there any wonder that we are where we are and we will be where we will be? Because until we can kind of figure out some way to intervene in every single child's life to make sure they're getting what they need, it's almost going to be like a vicious cycle where the only thing that develops is technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And as technology does develop, babysitting per se, I mean, I had a babysitting job when I was about 14. Somebody used to pay me a shilling every Saturday night to look after their little boy or girl or whatever it was. Babysitting these days is done 90% of the time electronically. From the instant a child is born, let's prop it up in front of Peppa Pig on Netflix or whatever and leave it there while I hoover the house. It's stimulated, it's seeing colours, etc., etc. And there's nothing wrong with that unless and until it becomes 90% of their waking life, in which case we fall into a whole new realm. But in terms of childhood mental health, certainly here in the UK, it reached critical issue level about 2 or 3 years ago. And 2 or 3 years ago, the stats were, now I would suspect on the back of COVID, it's significantly more now, to be fair. But 2 or 3 years ago, by the time a child was 14 in the UK, it would have experienced 50% of the children who, by the time they reach 14, would have experienced at least one mental health related episode in their life up to that point. That will have been identified by a doctor. And it's a very broad spectrum these days, because things like school refusal is classified as a mental health issue. So it could be anything like that, or anxiety, the autistic spectrum, any amount of other phobias and isms that you can think of are sort of been lumped together. So possibly the figures aren't true reflection of people's actual mental health. But by the time we finished adult education, circa 24, because obviously some people go way beyond that, but circa 24, that 50% has risen to 75%. We've got it wrong. We've got it wrong in terms of caring for and nurturing our young people. And I was that young person, but in the 60s, nobody knew. And if they knew, they didn't give a monkeys.
Mm.
You know, sort yourself out. Go and see your doctor, sort yourself out. Okay.
Coming back to that, you said earlier that you'd made peace with your past.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
I read a lot in the early days of my sobriety. I was really still physically very poorly, and I spent at least 12 months just doing nothing but being, which was a completely new thing to me. I'd always been a reader, so I started to read even more, and I read the likes of Maya Angelou and Stephen Covey and stuff like that, and so I learned a lot, but I also then started to apply those principles that I'd learned. Forgiveness for me, I think more than anything else, became my passport to freedom. But the act of forgiveness isn't necessarily, if at all, anything to do with the other person. It's about forgiving out. For me, it was about forgiving myself for my part in that. You know, I didn't know what I didn't know about another person. I did know that 5 bottles of wine per day, which is what I was drinking on the day I was admitted to hospital, I did know that that would kill me. But subconsciously, I got past the point of caring. I did a disservice to my family, to my kids, to my then 3, now 5 grandchildren. And it took a lot of hard work. Forgiveness is not about giving in. It's not about losing face. It's all about, in my humble opinion, it's all about allowing ourselves to make peace with the past in a way that serves to make us happier and healthier and whole. The thing about the past, anybody's past, it doesn't matter who we are, incidentally, the thing about the past is it long ago ceased to serve any purpose in our life other than to remind us either of things that we are really happy to remember or devastated by. And there's not much in between because our wonderful, brilliant brains don't see the point. Everything's emotion led, the way we feel. If you ask you, how are you feeling today? Oh, I'm feeling really happy. But you look very miserable. I'm going to say, well, cheer up then. You don't look very happy. I can't possibly know that you don't feel happy just by looking at you because you don't evidence it on your face. Our emotions mean, the word emotion means energy in motion. And when we feel happy, we can evidence that by laughing. When we feel sad, we can evidence that by crying. But it's the emotion within us, the feeling that we have, is what we attach significance to. So going back to children, for argument's sake, if as a child I learned to be quiet because every time I raised my head above the parapet, I got a good beating, I would do anything not to repeat that experience because I didn't like, number one, I didn't like what happened, but number two, I didn't like the way it made me feel. So the fear factor, as opposed to the X factor, was born. Yeah. You stay away from the things that are going to bring you discomfort, make you feel uncomfortable, make you feel scared, etc. It's feeling. The way we think. If I think to myself, if I say this, Paul's going to be really angry with me, and then I'm not going to like what he's going to have to say, that same feeling comes back. Forgiving ourselves, there is nothing to forgive, incidentally, as a child. There is nothing to forgive your child self, because we are children and we are at the behest and at the mercy almost of our parents. And the majority of children grow up to be happy, healthy, whole, optimistic human beings. We're all incidentally born to be happy souls. We learn how not to be. So forgiveness for me was letting go of the parts of me that hung on to a past that long ago ceased to serve me. You know, it's the person that I ultimately forgave. What I did in terms of that actual exercise was I had known they were going to die, and I decided that I was going to confront them before, but I decided I was going to confront them before I knew they were going to die. And the day I went to see them, I'd written a letter, and I knew that the chances were they wouldn't be open for discussing it because it wasn't their fault, nothing had happened, blah blah blah. And I walked in, and this person told me they were dying, and I literally got the letter in my hand, and I folded it up and I put it back in my pocket because I made the conscious choice at that point that they'd got bigger fish to fry. You know, they knew that we were definitely going to die. We just didn't know how long. And I forgot about that letter for the longest of time. They subsequently passed away very quickly, and my world fell apart for a long time. I was 39 at that point. It took me from 39 to 52 to almost kill myself because I didn't have the skill set or the inclination to explore my part in everything that happened.
Mhm.
Some years later, post 52, as in post recovery from alcoholism, we were moving house and I found the letter just purely by chance, and I opened it and I read it out loud to myself. So that was what, 14, 13 years hence. And I read it out loud to myself and I cried absolute buckets. I literally bawled my eyes out, just me in the house, and I just bawled, and till I couldn't do it anymore, so I couldn't cry anymore. And afterwards, I realized that all that pent up emotion, all that angst, all those feelings that I'd never ever been able to, number one, address, and number two, let go of, with regard to that particular person and the previous years, had actually gone. So I made a choice. I took the letter, I kept the letter for a while, and I sat with it. I say to people a lot now, I'm just sitting with this. I need to just let it permeate through my head. I'm just going to sit with it and see what falls out of the tree. And after a few days, I went to where we'd scattered the ashes, and I read the letter out loud again to this person, in inverted commas. And I'd taken a disposable lighter with me, and I had a similar experience, but not as intense in terms of the emotion release. And then I set fire to the letter. I set fire to it. It crumpled up into ashes. I scattered it where this person was scattered, and I walked away without ever looking back. And I truly, honestly, I'm not particularly a religious person, by the way, but I truly, honestly felt a sense of release, the like of which I'd never felt before. It was incredibly powerful.
That's a huge part of therapy for people that are struggling with various things. So actually, to sit and get them to write a letter, putting down everything and never actually sending the letter.
Yes.
You actually kept this thing for, was it 14 years?
13, 14 years. 14 years. I think I actually kept it by default. It was I stuffed it back in my pocket. When I got home that day, it was there. I'd not thought about it in years. I came across it in a box that I'd opened because we were moving house. I came across it at a time when I probably needed to read it more than anything.
So you actually kept the letter then. So you took it out of your pocket with a deliberate intent, if you think about it, of looking at it at some stage in the future.
At some stage, and it just disappeared in the chaos that is my house and all the rest of it. And but the way I work with people now, because I went on in this last 8 years to qualify as an LP practitioner. I class myself as being a mental well-being mindset specialist, so I help people make sense of the stories they tell themselves and then help them to pick it apart. One of the first things that I did was create a journaling tool called Where Am I Going? And I still use it today. I'm about 6 years into this journey now, and that's designed to do just that. On the back of that letter, it picks all the relationship connections that we have, childhood, families, workplace, etc. And people just say to me, "Wow, this is so powerful." And I the way that I counsel them with that is take each question, because there are a number of them. Take each question. Don't self-edit, don't audit, don't spell check, don't do anything. Just get a physical pen and paper, and write it down. And just write and write and write and write. If you can write 3 sentences, brilliant. If you write 5 pages, brilliant. It needs to come out. And then for each time you've done that, close the book. Don't read it straight back. Just close the book, walk away. Go back to it when you feel comfortable and do just that. They can't do it in the book instantly. They have to do it on separate sheets of paper deliberately so that they can do that if they choose. And you're right, it's an immensely powerful tool, because until we recall it, we don't act. That's no more or less than writing prompts. But you would write something different to question 1 as I would, and that's the way that it's meant to be, because it's our own recall. But that brings me full circle back to the power of the unconscious mind to completely and totally drive our lives, and we're oblivious to it. We're oblivious. It's amazing. It's an amazing tool. But
If you use it.
if you use it wisely, and we do have to reboot it. It much like turning the laptop off and on when it sort of has a glitch. You reboot it. There isn't anything wrong with realizing that today is the day that I'm actually not going to make those choices anymore, or I'm not going to say that like that to that person anymore because it serves no purpose. We can take a chance to choose to change anything that is within our control at any given point on any given day. And yet
Absolutely.
we think that this is just our lot. I think it was Stephen Covey that said we get what we settle for. No, it wasn't. It was Seth Godin. We get what we settle for, but we don't have to settle for what we get.
I think a lot of people have said the same thing in various
Yeah.
formats.
Ah,
So I just want to go back a second. So
okay.
you're in the hospital, you've gone home for a year, and you've been at home for a year, and you kind of, like you said, sort of struggling getting your health back to normal. You've you figured out about forgiveness and letting go of the past. You've written this letter, which you then kind of found 14 years later and dealt with that situation. What else, if anything, made up your part of your recovery in a big way? So that you stayed, so that you said 3,000 days now without a drink, which is a massive
Yeah.
achievement. What else? What other tools have you used to keep yourself on that track to health?
I would have to say initially the power of recall, because on day 5, just flipping back to day 5, when my consultant came to see me and he told me I'd won the battle, but I wasn't going to win the war. I was still dying. My husband was there with me. The consultant had arrived late after visiting, after rounds, sorry, to deliver his verdict. Our younger child, the younger of our 3 children, arrived early for visiting. So he delivered the bombshell, left. We were both in tears. The younger child appeared. We were both crying. She'd seen me cry a lot, not so much a father. There was no secret. All the family knew I was there and why. And she asked what had happened. So her father had to tell her that I was still dying. She let out the most guttural scream I've ever heard in my life. And she held my gaze for the most, it seemed like forever, but I'm pretty sure it was like that. But in that split second, Paul, what I saw was anger. She was really angry. She wasn't yet 18. She was angry. She hated me for sure. She was scared witless, definitely. But more than anything, in her eyes, in that split second, I saw love that I didn't, not only had I never seen in the eyes of one of my significant grown-ups, but I didn't even have for myself. At a time when I didn't even like myself, I saw love which was pure and real and raw. And in that split second, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that if I did indeed escape the death sentence, as it were, and I walked out of there, my life would not only would my life be different, the life of my family would be different, and somehow intuitively it would pay itself forward. I had no clue how, but I made that, and it was what Bob Proctor calls a paradigm shift. When something happens that after its effect, you know with certainty that your life will never be the same again, good or bad. That I just knew it. Something within me had shifted. And in the 3,000 plus days since, there have been some really horrific times within the family, my father dying and various family politics, as you all get. And through that all, not once have I ever caved. There have been several times where I've jumped into my car, I've driven out to the Peak District nearby where I live, and I've marched into a pub where nobody knows me, and I've slammed my keys on the counter and drummed the countertop like a madwoman in EastEnders and gone, just give me a minute. I'll have a pint of Diet and Coke, but don't put any ice in it. And then I'd drink my Diet Coke and I'd leave and I'd come home. And I think in the early days, I was testing my mettle, I was testing myself. But there have been many days where I could have caved. I haven't because I genuinely, ultimately just don't feel the need anymore, period. But in the very early days, the look in my daughter's eyes became my why. And I'd had a why for a very long time. I'd had a should forever. I should stop drinking. I should have stopped drinking 15 years before I did. My should became my must, maybe about 3 years before I was admitted to hospital. But in that split second of my why being born, it was much bigger and far more powerful than all my shoulds and musts put together had ever been. So that became my anchor. In NLP terms, it became my anchor. And I built it from there. So the recall of that moment is so significantly rooted in my psyche that on occasion when I have been tempted, because I have, I just no, I can't do that anymore. I don't want to now, but in the very early days, I could have easily caved.
Would it be fair to would it be fair to say that that pivotal moment, that 1 second in time, actually saved your life more
Absolutely.
so than the medical assistance and all the rest of it?
Absolutely. I mean, Prof. Gleason, my consultant, who I still see, well, I don't see him anymore, but 4 times a year, I'm back in the liver clinic. I'm back in the clinic for checkups and so on. And his ears rang the day I walked out of hospital. He said to me, I'll see you again for all the wrong reasons, because people like you never change. And I just smiled at him, because my pivotal moment had happened at that point, which he knew nothing about. And I just said, I look forward to seeing you and discussing this in due course. And we've sparred several times, in recent years. And I love him to pieces. He's a very blunt Irishman. So he played his part, but you're right. The need for me to have a why that was bigger than my must and should, and finding it in my daughter's eyes, for sure that saved my life.
Would you say, Sue, that not just with your clients, but in life in general, the biggest challenge most people face is that either they don't know their why, or
Yes.
they haven't actually found it yet?
I absolutely, totally. I mean, my mental health journey is phenomenal. And by the time I was 39, I had 4 nervous breakdowns, literally, well documented. But I was definitely never ever in my head suicidal. I didn't like heights. I was taking too many tablets already. I couldn't stand the sight of blood. I just have to put up with it. This is my lot. This is just how it has to be. I've got 3 children. I've got 3 grandchildren. I like to travel. I've got a husband that I'm still married to today, that I met when I was 17. I had much to be grateful for. I had loads of whys, but we kid ourselves. The stories we tell ourselves become more powerful. And until something significant happens to make us understand what it is that we have to lose, I think then, we many of, because we're only human, and we are infallible, and we will make mistakes, and we will slip off the wagon, and all the business, that addiction entails. But the necessity to find a why and understand why it's a why, not just a why do you want to earn £10,000 a month? Well, it'll help me to travel. Why would you want to travel? It's far more deeper than that. It's much more deeper than that. That's superficial. Everything else other than our lives is just stuff. And that moment, that's it. That's all we've got.
How do you help your clients, or what would you say to people that would say, well, I don't know what my why is? How do people find their why? What can they do?
I think people trip themselves up. There's a concept, have, do, be, or be, do, have. If I have £10,000 a month income, it means I'll be able to travel the world. If I have £10,000 a month income, I'll be able to travel the world and do what I please, and then I'll be happy. Okay, that's a realistic assumption for many people. Mm-hmm. It's on its head. We've got it the wrong way around. If I decide to be happy, because trust me, happiness is a choice. If I decide to be happy and I relax, then I'll have the ideas that will generate me an income of circa £10,000 a month, and ultimately I'll be able to travel. If we've got a pyramid like that, an inverse pyramid, We turn it on its head and we get it the right way up. We decide to be some. I just used happiness. I just put that out the air. But we decide to be something. We find out how we're going to do it, and it enables us to have the goal. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it comes back full circle to what you were saying right at the start of this conversation about choice.
Absolutely.
What would you say to using happiness? Because I completely agree that happiness is a choice and we decide whether we're going to be happy or not. What would you say to people that disagree with that, that say that this has just happened and that's just happened, I can't possibly be happy, I've just lost my job, my wife's just left me, whatever?
If you are, if you have a roof over your head, food in your belly, clothes on your back, you have a smartphone in your hand, you are in the top, I believe it's 7% of the people in the world who are not, by definition, societal definitions, not mine, who are rich. You're not a rich person. I'm not a rich person. That's an assumption on my part. That's a generalization. This person isn't a rich person. They earn £25,000 a year. They're mortgaged up to the hilt. Their car's on hire purchase, and they're 2 seconds away from being made redundant because of COVID. They've got a lot to lose and a lot to worry about. But they have their health, they have their family, they have everything. It's about understanding that actually it does matter individually. It matters to each and every one of us what situations are unfolding in our lives at that moment in time. I have been fortunate enough in this last 5 years to go to India 3 times. A pauper on the streets of Delhi that I met and gave a few dozen rupees to, was one of the happiest people that I have ever been blessed to meet. He was about 15. He had rags on his back. He had no shoes on his feet. He had the biggest smile I've ever seen in my life. And he was going home to live in a shack on a shantytown type affair. And I asked him, why are you so happy? And he said, his only answer was, why would I not be? I'll eat tonight. We get embroiled in stuff. In the Western world, we get bogged down in the wax of life, in the minutiae of life. This happens, that happens. I haven't got enough time. One of the things that I do is work with people to reduce the negative effects of stress and overwhelm. We are, all of us in the Western world, increasingly stressed out. Stress, in its simplest form, is, number one, it's a human construct. Time is a human construct. When we put the two together in a negative manner, in our heads at least, stress and overwhelm begin to impact negatively on our lives. And yet stress per se is no more or less, going back to the word perception / assumption, stress is no more or less than our view of the number of things that we have to do within a certain period of time. So for argument's sake, if you're a journalist and you're on a deadline and you've known you've been on a deadline for a month, and yet you've not written the article that's going to press tomorrow, you're completely stressed out because you don't have the time. Not true. Stress and the assumption of how much we have to do in a particular frame of time is what leads us to feel overwhelmed, anxious, goes full circle back to the thought cycle. The way we think becomes the way we speak, becomes the way we feel, and becomes the way ultimately we act. Yeah, I know I've got a deadline, but I always do it 3 days before it's due. It always goes in on time. And one time it doesn't. A pauper in Delhi has no construct of time. That kid didn't even have a watch. He knows it's time to get up, when the sun comes up. He knows it's time to eat, maybe for the first time and only time that day, if he's lucky, as the sun goes down, and he'll have his supper. But he's happy with his lot because he understands that and I think the less we have, and that's an extreme example, obviously, but the less we have, the more able we are to feel happy, because we don't have to worry. We don't have to worry about what other people think. If we, all of us, collectively as a race now, took our smartphones and threw them away, there'd be mass panic worldwide. for a start. There would. But ultimately, we'd start to relax. A long time ago, I turned off all the notifications on my phone. Ping, 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 ping. So on Facebook. I mean, I work on Facebook for a living now. You know, I need to be around people that that's where my clients are. But I control it. It doesn't control me anymore.
Mm.
It got me into a lot of trouble. My buying into the realms of stress and overwhelm got me into an awful lot of trouble. And I'm not going to go there again.
What
Not
about,
worth it.
sorry, what about the people that say that a lot of stress is, what's the word I'm looking for? Genetic is not necessarily the right word, but part of our nature, part of our makeup, going back to the saber-toothed tiger behind the bush analogy, that some stress is unavoidable because it keeps us alive.
Absolutely. Stress in and of itself is a naturally occurring survival tool. You're absolutely right. As when we're born as children, I don't actually know what they do outside the Western world, but in a live birth in the Western world, even today, one of the first things that doctors, nurses, medics do is test for breathing and responses. So the old-fashioned way used to be hang the baby up in the air, clap it on the backside, instantly it squeaks, it's alive, it's breathing, cover it up, sort it out. Why they do that? Yes, clearly they need to make sure they've got a live, healthy baby. But primarily, what it does is it flips a switch in our brain, in our amygdala, for the flight and fight response. As human beings, we are born with the ability to be afraid of two things: falling and being startled.
Yeah, loud noises, yeah.
Yeah. Loud noises. A saber-toothed tiger is roaring at you because it's dinner time. He's going to eat you. You're going to run away. Falling because you've run away so far and so fast from the saber-toothed tiger, you didn't see the cliff and you fell over it and died anyway. Primarily, that's the design. The design fault in modern day life is we perceive everything to be our cause of stress. Lack of time, lack of money, lack of health,
I
and
think
so on.
the challenge that we face is that we haven't evolved as far or as fast as society has evolved. With, you know, our
Absolutely.
brain still thinks there's a saber-toothed tiger behind the bush. Well,
Yeah.
clearly there isn't. So that gets translated into that car might run me over, or those four guys over there look suspicious, and so on.
Yeah.
So we put the picture of the saber-toothed tiger on all of these strange things that are completely unnecessary, probably haven't even noticed us.
Yeah, absolutely. And these days it's permeated even more because we and especially among younger people, you know, with the pressure in inverted commas of zero size models, airbrush models on young girls is ridiculously immense. You know, we need to be a certain size to be deemed to be acceptable in society. We're all of us every single day from the second we're born, especially in this 21st century, we are societally and environmentally conditioned subconsciously to be normal, to be perfect. Normal doesn't exist. It's rubbish. What is normal? It's a group study of when babies are born in this country, they have a line they have to follow. As long as they're hitting the dots on the line in terms of growth and well-being, they're deemed to be normal and of no concern to social services or the healthcare system or anything else. You know, normal. I say to people all the time, if you feel as though you need/want to do something and it feels right for you, with the disclaimer, as long as it's not illegal or immoral, then do it. Who am I to tell you that that's not normal? One of our grandchildren said to me the other day, Non, is it okay for boys to marry boys? So-and-so says it's not. And I said to him, absolutely. But there's always a but. Boys, no, you have to be a certain age. You have to, that boy needs to be a man before he can make that choice.
Yeah, I mean, what I always say is, you know, what happens behind closed doors between consenting adults is nobody's business but theirs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My father, God love him, I loved him to pieces, but he was a very typical 60s bloke. Minor, men were men, you know, beers on a Saturday night and all that business. And he did not understand that side of society as it unfolded. And I actually said to him at one point, the problem is, Dad, you're letting your imagination run away with you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, two things. Number one, Do you fancy, as a straight man, do you fancy every female you ever lay your eyes on? No, of course I don't. What makes you think a gay man's going to like you? You're short, you're dumpy, you're going bald. Get over yourself. Stop imagining what they do behind closed doors and deal with your own life.
I think the thing is, as we discussed earlier on, is that, I mean, I'm a child of the 60s, our upbringing, everything that was going on at that time, was racism was seen as normal.
Yeah,
Men, men were men. They didn't cry. They were the ones that went out and brought home the bacon. Wife stayed at home and had the kids and did the housework and all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
And I mean, I'm lucky. I've kind of grown with the times, as it were. But I've still got, I still have certain lapses. I'm not perfect by any way, any shape or means. But a lot of people haven't grown, and
yeah,
they've passed that on to the next generation. Because I firmly believe that racism, using as an example that you mentioned earlier on, is taught, is learned.
absolutely.
It's not nature, it's not inherent in us. It's because I'm born into a family where one of the major players in that family doesn't like people from a different color or a different
Yeah,
race or whatever. And that's how I learn to be. And I don't have a choice
yeah,
until this is when we're kids, we don't have choices. It's
yeah,
only when maybe I get older and if I'm lucky, I get out into the world, I either travel or I go to university, that I realize that actually they're just people like me.
yeah,
Cut them and they bleed the same kind of stuff,
absolutely.
But if they don't, the danger is if a person doesn't travel and stays part of that microcosm, then they don't get to learn about the rest of it,
No,
or they don't get to learn, but they also choose not to learn because they don't
absolutely.
make that choice. And then, of course, it continues.
Yeah,
And I think going way back to part of our discussion where we talked about, kids don't come with a manual and there's no intervention, that's when we need to kind of look at intervening. Because, yeah, okay, you've got to take your baby to the doctors every so often to make sure they have jabs and they get weighed and measured, all this kind of stuff. But there's no kind of inspector coming around going, okay, right, yeah, okay, TV 4 hours a day, that's fine. This is fine,
yeah,
that's not fine. You just said something there about people with different nationalities. Oh, right, okay, we need to address that.
yeah,
And that kind of thing doesn't happen. And it's only when that kind of things happen that we're going to eradicate things like racism and all the other isms,
yeah,
homophobia. Why the hell in the third millennium are people still, anti-gay or
yeah.
whatever? Like I said to you, behind closed doors, you do what the hell you like, consenting adults, but there are still people that get upset and even offended by the very notion that people do certain
Yeah.
things.
I mean, the thing with people getting upset, people are getting angry for various reasons. COVID would be a perfect example. It doesn't matter if it's race, religion, gender issues, whatever. People are coming from a fear-based perspective. It's the and what I know for sure in any fear-based situation is where we are now and where we want to be. There's one piece of information missing. The bit in the middle is the bit that we don't know that we don't know until we've crossed that bridge and we've grown as a result.
Mm.
The analogy I use there is very early on in this part of my life, I decided I was going to do a tandem skydive for charity because I could in all realistic terms in my head, I couldn't run a business called Fear Less and Live More if I was still scared of heights. So I had to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid of heights. So I signed up to do this charity skydive, shed load of money for Mind. I'd lost my mind so many times I thought it was only good to give back. So and we did this skydive. And as I'm sat on the edge of the plane and we're waiting to go out with my instructor, I'd made a pledge to myself inside my head. I was going to shout fearless. I'm going to scream fearless as I jump out, and that's going to anchor it in my brain. We came out the plane like that, and instantly did that because I'm with an instructor. He's got two parachutes on his back or whatever he's got, and we're heavy. So I suddenly turned from being upright in the right way to doing a Superman dive head first. And fearless very quickly turned to the Latin expletive. I sounded like a motorboat running out of fuel. for about 30 seconds because I was absolutely scared to death at that point. But do you know what, Paul? When he pulled the ripcord and we balanced out, and then he pulled the chute and we sort of glided down the next sort of 15,000 feet, it struck me halfway down that I had never, ever been afraid of heights, ever. The bit that was missing, the piece of the puzzle that was missing, what I didn't know was, number one, the parachute was going to save my life. And number two, if it didn't save my life, that was the bit I was scared about, because I was scared to death of hitting the ground at 500 mile an hour and going splat. Same set of circumstances. It was a different fear. It was the story I'd been telling myself that got me out of decorating for years because I wouldn't go up a step ladder. You know, it's the power of the words that we use are pivotal in creating a life that we can live in glorious technicolor, or ensuring that we exist in the shadows of a prison that is our mind, that's not open to possibility, the possibility of accepting people's differences, the possibility that we can do whatever the hell we want as long as it's not illegal or immoral, and we can live the life that we want to live individually and collectively as a human race in happiness and joy. We were born to be happy. We need to get rid of the fears of the opinions of others, the fear of somebody or something being different, the fear of what have we got to be scared of? Saber-toothed tigers are extinct. We're not going to run and jump over a cliff unless we're suicidal, and in which case then we've got a different set of fears that we need addressing. We have got nothing to fear. Which president was it that said it? We have got nothing to fear except fear itself. It keeps us stuck exactly where we say we don't want to be, inside a comfort zone that's long ago stopped being comfortable, and it's become suffocating and a prison. Madness.
All about choice again.
Absolutely.
The poster behind you, Sue, lists a lot of different things. What is your main thing? What's the main thing that you do, and who do you help?
I essentially work with, these days I work with professional swans. I work with people who are like I once was. They give the impression that they're gliding serenely along in life without a care in the world, yet underneath the surface they're paddling like crazy just to stay afloat. So I primarily work one-to-one with people, although I do corporate sort of work when we're allowed, in real space with real people in real time. But I work one-to-one with people to help them to reduce the negative impacts of stress and overwhelm by showing them how fear plays a part in that, and how they can unpick it and all the rest of it. And basically I help them to confidently create the long-lasting changes that they seek, not me, and lead them ultimately to lead happier and more meaningful lives, because that's why we're here. You know, the stress and overwhelms that we think are the cause of our issues very quickly fade away when we sit down in a room and we start to pare that back. The stress and overwhelm are symptoms of things that are systemically wrong in our own lives. Things like personal boundaries. I have to do this because I've always said yes to Granny on a Sunday. No, you don't. Let's talk about that.
Choices again.
Yeah, always a choice.
I've got two more questions. Before I get to them, what's the best way for people to reach out to you, Sue?
My website is suecurr.com. But if you go to Facebook, I am a bit of a social media whore. I'm all over Facebook. Sue Curr. My surname is CURR, so it's quite easy to find. But Sue Curr, Fear Leslie Moore, on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm out there. And yeah. So if anybody wants to email me, just email enquiries@suecurr.com.
Excellent. Okay, my two questions, and I'm not sure how you can answer them. The first one is, if you could go back to the day you first started drinking and change everything, would you?
No, absolutely not. And that surprises people when I say that, because had you asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said yes. Unequivocally, I would have said yes. Today, my answer is an instant no, because I needed to learn more about myself than I ever thought was possible to learn. The person that I was pre 8 years ago was somebody I didn't like. I didn't love, I wasn't proud of in any way, because I'd been conditioned to be that person. This person I'm proud as hell of. I love the life I live. I'm living a life I love. It's not perfect. I'm not rich. I have disagreements with family members, but it's all done openly, honestly, and healthily. So no, I needed to have that journey, because I believe that we're all put here to learn the lessons that we need to learn, regardless what our beliefs are, spiritual, religious, or otherwise. We all need to learn the lessons we need to learn in order to be the best person that we can be. Am I the best person I possibly can be? No, but I'm a better person than I was yesterday, and hopefully not as good as the one I'm going to be tomorrow. So I'm now grateful for the drinking career. I'm not grateful for how much it cost me, to be fair, but financially. But I am grateful for everything thus far, good, bad, or indifferent, that's happened to me, and that includes being as drunk as a skunk, down and depressed.
This is part of the same question.
Okay.
I agree with you that we're here to learn lessons. How do people know what lesson they're here to learn? Or
I
does
think the
that
short
fall in as part of we don't know what we don't know?
I think it falls partly into that. We don't know what we don't know. I can think of one situation that surrounded um, the period of time when my father passed away 7 years ago, and something happened within the extended family that triggered a whole series of events, which involved a family member being sort of, none of us wanted to speak to them, blah blah blah, as these things do in the aftermath of the grief and all that business. And it was 6 months later, with this said person still being maligned by members of the family, etc., for doing ABC and causing all this fuss, that, and I can't discuss what it is, but a situation came to light that led to proceedings which, shall we say, were of the legal nature, that had person A not done the things that the rest of us, in inverted commas, disliked her for or hated her for, etc., that situation wouldn't have been uncovered, and those people would have got away with blue murder. We don't understand much of what's happening and unfolding in our lives at this moment in time when it's happening. Retrospectively, sometimes we never find out. Oftentimes, something is uncovered that we needed to know. And in that particular situation, it was an instance which potentially was very unpleasant to have discovered. But in everyday life, none of us know what we don't know. But what I do know, without a shadow of a doubt, in terms of my own life now, I needed to know, number one, that I wasn't infallible. People smoke 60, 70, 80 cigs a day and pray they're not going to get lung cancer. I had convinced myself that actually, yeah, drinking was part of my culture, it was part of my family, and nothing was going to happen to me. Knowing that I am not immortal, knowing that I'm only human after all, was a massive lesson for me. I always knew that, to be fair, but the stories we tell ourselves make us believe all manner of things. And in order for us to be able to learn the lessons that we need to, even if we're not aware of them, we have to be open to the possibility of change. We have to be open, in my humble opinion, to the possibility of the fact that we're not always right. We have to be open enough to embrace life for what it is, which is an opportunity. I'm currently, I listened to a podcast the other day by Rangan Chatterjee, and he had a guest on there called Edith. I think her surname is pronounced Eger, Eger, 93-year-old Holocaust survivor. And a very good friend gifted me the book. That book is called The Gift. In fact, it's here. I don't know if you can see that.
That's The Gift, 12 Lessons to Save Your Life.
Yeah, she gifted me that. That arrived yesterday in the post, God bless her. And that's gonna be my reading for this next week or so. Having listened to that podcast, that lady at 93 years old summed her life up from the point that she was interned in the concentration camps. She very quickly realized that actually she was free where it counted inside a mind that was hers alone to control. And actually, the Nazi guards were the prisoners because they were being forced to do what they were doing. She had no choice. She was taken there. They were being forced. So they, by definition, it was such a powerful thing, and it underpins the conversation that we've having, I think, quite well, because we have, it comes back to that word again, choice. I can choose to be happy today, or I can choose to be miserable. You know, I was going to go for a walk today, but it's pouring it down with rain, so I'm not going to go for a walk. Becomes absolutely pouring it down, but I really want to go for a walk, so I'm going to go anyway. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change, but also it leads us to understand just how much we've got to be grateful for in this life. And the lessons we learn along the way, we actually often don't know that we're learning them in that moment in time. Retrospectively, we look back across time and we think, that's why that happened.
Yeah, retrospect is a wonderful thing. My last question, if there's somebody listening or watching this today that's on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bottles of wine a day like you were all those years ago, what would you say to them?
If you think that you have an issue in terms of alcohol or drugs or anything like that, that for me, a good way to assess it is to say to them that the chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they're too strong to be broken. So if you're on 2 bottles of wine a day, and you think you can stop, try. If it becomes impossible and you can't, then that's a big clue. But historically and from experience, we all of us know if we're addicted, we know we're addicted. Whether or not we can admit it to ourselves is a different thing. But if anybody needs to talk about anything like that, please just point them in mind. I will happily spend 20, 30 minutes chatting with somebody. If I can't help them, I will know somebody who can. I'm not precious about this. I would rather help people to help themselves, whether it's me doing it or whether it's me just saying, right, okay, so where do you live? Because there are many agencies out there. People struggle with, the families of addicts struggle. So the person who is addicted may well be that oblivious that actually for them it's no longer a problem, bless them, but the families will be struggling. So oftentimes I have conversations with families and point them to the agencies in their areas that can help them as families, because that's the hidden side of addiction that people don't think about.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping to helping anybody and point them in the right direction to set them off on a journey that will set them free.
Listen, Sue, this has been a brilliant conversation, quite wide ranging and very eye-opening to me in certain respects. I really appreciate you coming on today, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it myself. Thank you.
That's the end of another brilliant episode, and I'll see you again soon. Bye now.